In an effort to make the North Penn School District a more equitable institution of learning for all students, the Board of School Directors of the North Penn School District hereby adopts the following equity statement. It is economically and morally vital that the North Penn School District prepare all of our students to be college and/or career ready, to actively participate in our democracy, and to respect, value, and include diverse peoples.
The call for equity is recognizing the critical role of school leaders in the provision of education for our students. The Board of School Directors of the North Penn School District calls for equity. Equity is the just and fair distribution of resources based upon each individual student's needs. Equitable resources include funding, programs, policies, initiatives, and supports that target each student's unique background and school context to guarantee that all students have equal access to a high-quality education. Students in the North Penn School District enter school buildings with their school supplies ready to learn. Students also bring with them unique gifts, individualized learning styles, skills, experiences, and cultural identities. A significant number of our students also carry the weight of poverty, racism, sexism, trauma, and other forms of prejudices and conditions that affect how they perform in school. Achieving equity ensures that students' identities will not predetermine their success in schools. As school leaders, we have an obligation to ensure that each and every child has the opportunity to fulfill the purpose of education by addressing the individual needs and concerns of students. This is essential in order to eliminate achievement and opportunity gaps created and perpetuated through disparities that include but are not limited to underrepresentation of students of color in advanced placement courses, disproportionality in the frequency of suspensions and expulsions for students of color, disproportionality in the identification of students of color for special education services, lack of representation of the Black experience in educational curricular materials, and an equitable distribution of district resources.
The achievement gap is the academic disparity or differences between groups of students. Typically, the achievement gap pertains to major differences in academic indicators such as test scores and graduation rates between white students and students of color, economically advantaged and economically disadvantaged students, male and female students, English proficient and English learner students, and special education and non-special education students. The opportunity gap represents how the educational system delivers education to different groups of students. Disparities in educational delivery lead to different academic, social, and economic outcomes between students due to the inequitable distribution of opportunities, resources, and funding. In the pursuit of equity, the Board of School Directors in the North Penn School District is committed to assessing our actions locally and acting to address both individual and systemic issues of inequity in order to overcome institutional barriers and create opportunities so that all children have the tools and supports necessary to achieve their highest potential. The Board is dedicated to advancing and enacting equitable policies, practices, and programming in our schools and throughout our community.
Whereas we are deeply saddened and outraged by the recent killing of George Floyd and violence against Black men and women. The subsequent protests have shined a spotlight on the harmful effects of racism and inequality. Furthermore, the public response has highlighted the racial trauma that our Black students, families, staff, and communities have not only endured for centuries, but continue to face today.
Whereas we must recognize that racism and hate have no place in our schools and society. However, we must understand that racism is systemic and it is unconsciously and consciously rooted in our institutions, policies, and practices. Consequently, we acknowledge that we must look at our own school policies and practices through an anti-racist and equity lens to address traces of racism and inequity that still exist within our own school community.
Whereas we must center the voices of staff, students, families, and communities who have historically endured discrimination and marginalization. Their lived experiences and stories require attention, require respect, require empathy, and most importantly, require action. Therefore, it is essential that we establish an expectation that a diversity of students, families, and community members, specifically those that have been ignored, discriminated against, and marginalized are heard and included on substantive school and district issues.
Whereas we must better educate ourselves and seek to educate the community on the historical and current impact of racism and discrimination on our students, families, and communities, as well as understand our role in perpetuating such inequity through continuous professional development and opportunities for honest dialogue and listening sessions. We hope to build partnerships in the community focused on overcoming racism and other barriers. By doing so, we can create opportunities to ensure that each child has the tools and supports needed to thrive.
Whereas we must advocate to advance civil rights, cultivate an anti-racist school climate necessary to meet the needs of all our students in our care. All students, no matter their race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, language ability, disability, and other identities deserve to feel safe, to feel seen, and to feel affirmed.
Therefore, it be resolved that the Board of Directors of the North Penn School District unequivocally stand firm on our collective responsibility to foster an equitable and inclusive environment for every student, staff member, parent, and community member. We commit to use our role as board directors to recognize, respond, and speak out against injustice and racial inequity in our school community. In support of this goal, the Board of Directors of the North Penn School District commits to the following action steps: passage of an equity statement, equity policy, and equity action plan; meetings between students and school board members to discuss issues relevant to race within the North Penn School District; biannual review of academic, social-emotional, process, and discipline data disaggregated by race; annual climate survey to gauge the community's response to institutional reforms related to the district's cultural proficiency plan; ongoing professional development for all North Penn teachers, administrators, and staff; creation of a building-level steering committee for each school that will include parents, building leaders, and teachers; establish an equity advisory council as an accountability measure at the district level. Adopted this 16th day of July, 2020.